In my early 20s, I used to visit cemeteries. I realize now that I was developing my understanding of the world, not just the physical world, but the world of spirit, energy, and emotion. I've always been sensitive to these things. I would visit South Bristane Cemetery, aka Dutton Park. This old cemetery was established in 1866, and it was the second largest cemetery in the state. There are 100,000 people buried there, and historically, it's fascinating. It contains all levels of society, from prominent people to prisoners executed on the gallows of GhoulishGal. The older section of the cemetery always attracted me because the headstones were works of art. The ornate graves of the wealthy stood up high on the hill and overlooked the river. I have always loved the use of symbols on the older graves. One Sunday afternoon, I went to Dutton Park Cemetery with a friend. As usual, the cemetery was deserted. My friend had wandered about 100 meters away, and I was walking along a row of seemingly similar graves until one drew my attention. This old grave was from the early 1900s and physically didn't look any different from the others. It had a tall, rounded headstone with a rusted steel fence surrounding it, and a small gate, slightly open. The difference with the grave was it had an energy to it. I knew rooms and houses gave off certain energy. I've walked past chairs and other objects that hold energy, but never a grave. When I feel energy, it's coarse and static before it becomes more defined, like a radio that's out of tune, and if you wait, you tune in and get an impression. It touches you, but not physically. Standing in front of the old grave, it became apparent to me that something was standing there. It was very still. In my mind, I could see an outline of a person standing there. This invisible being was watching me sidelong. He didn't want to be seen. The grave was neglected and crumbling. Anyone who cared about its occupants was long dead. I thought it was sad to think that a person standing there might not have anybody who cared. The small gate surrounding the grave was partially open, and not thinking it would cause any offense, I pushed the little rusty gate shut. Immediately, I heard a stern male voice growl,
"Don't touch the gate!"
The voice came from the grave, clear as a bell. I was startled. Someone very present was there. I reopened the gate to its original width. In my mind's eye, I could see an old man huffing and puffing, and shaking his head at my impertinence in touching the gate a second time. I retreated back to the relative safety of the main pathway. I turned to look back. He was still standing there on the grave. "Grumpy old beggar," I snorted before retreating down the hill. It was just a man without a physical form. For whatever reason, he was there. He did not want to engage with the living. That experience taught me to trust my instinct. That if I feel something's there, then it's there. I also learned not to touch other people's stuff. Seriously though, cemeteries are not good places to be. I avoid them nowadays. I think about that old man though. It is sad to think that this very conscious soul has been standing there for the past 100 years. Just standing on his grave. Around 10 years ago, when I was 18, I had an experience that I have been unable to forget or to explain since. I'm not sure what relevance this has to my story, but my friend had recently committed suicide, aged only 15 years old. As you would expect, this hit our group of friends very badly, and we were all upset. Whether we were together having a few beers, we would inevitably start talking about our friend, and it would become quite emotional. Very close to where we all lived, there was this large old cemetery which was no longer used. The grounds are still maintained, but there are no burials anymore, and most of the graves are so old that they are no longer visited by relatives of the deceased. Some of the graves are quite spectacular, and are considerably larger than the types of headstones used on graves these days. The only visitors to the cemetery are dog walkers, which made the area an ideal place for us teenagers to hang out and drink cider. Not something that I'm proud of looking back at, but we didn't vandalize the place. Much of the cemetery is woodland, with winding footpaths where we could walk around after dark and be as noisy as we wanted without attracting the attention of our local residences. As cemeteries go, by anyone's standard, it was a scary looking place, and certainly many people would never want to go there after dark. However, We had grown up beside it and had played in it since we were like 9 years old. We knew the place like the back of our hands, and we weren't scared in the slightest when we were there. One night, my friend and I were both drinking, although we were by no means drunk. We got to talking about our friend who had recently committed suicide as we walked around the cemetery again and again. This is when I had my experience. From nowhere, I suddenly had this overwhelming feeling of what I can only describe as impending doom. It was a horrible, frightening feeling, and is something that I have never experienced before or since. I turned to my friend to say something about it, but before I opened my mouth, he said, and this will go to my grave, "Did you feel that?" I can't remember what my response was, but we walked on in silence as quickly as we could and went straight out of the cemetery. I was too scared to look back, and the feeling didn't follow us. We met up with our friends and told them what had happened, and they still remember it to this day. I have thought about this experience many times since that night, and I just can't explain it. I wasn't brought up to be religious, and I would describe myself as being very skeptical of most supernatural stories. To be honest, most of the time I think that there must have been a simple explanation for this. We were in a cemetery, it was nighttime, and we were talking about our dead friend. It isn't hard to see how that could have spooked us, but other times, I think to myself that there must have been more to it than this. We weren't scared of the cemetery, we weren't telling ghost stories. I know what I felt, and I know that he felt something at the exact same time. And without me giving him indication that I was feeling something, I just can't explain it. And the scariest thing of all, the thing that scares me even to this day, is if what we really felt was supernatural, then it was evil. Absolutely, without question, it was evil. And that scares me more than anything. My experience with the gates of hell has been a very eye-opening and somewhat amazing experience. That is hard to believe even happened in the series of events that it did. I believe all things happen for a reason, and the synchronicity of these events have even further convinced me that this is true. Me and 3 friends decided to go to the cemetery one night, out of boredom. Problem is, I had taken some Klonopins before we left. I don't want to get into it, but reality is when I take those, I become possessed. Or as others would say, blacked out and remembered nothing about the experience of going there that night with my 3 friends. Fast forward to a few nights later, I'm outside talking on the phone, walking around my driveway. All of a sudden, I see something I will never forget. A green ball of light appeared very close to me in the air. It was there only for a brief moment, however. It did get my attention. I mentioned it to a couple people and dismissed it as something strange that I had just happened to catch a glimpse of. Well, a few days later, one of my 3 friends calls out of nowhere, asks if I want to go back to the gates of hell. And I did want to because I had no memory of going there the first time, and I really wanted to see it. So we go during the day. Nothing strange happened, I just took a few pictures and we left. This, however, caused me to sort of become a little hooked on the place, so I looked into the history and lore of this cemetery. And what caught my eye was the fact that one of the biggest ghost stories of what is witnessed at the gates of hell is a green orb that flies upwards and away. Since this matched what I saw, me and my friends decided to go again, this time at 3 a.m. It was very foggy, and the feel and energy of the moment really was coming together, but I couldn't believe what happened next. We were 10 minutes or so away from reaching the gates of hell when me and my friend's conversation led to her telling me that on the first night we had originally went, the night I have no memory of, she tells me the most important part of this whole situation. She says while I was possessed, high on the Klonopins, that I was going around bashing tombstones, knocking them over, and trying to destroy the graveyard. I have made the mistake of taking those for years in the past, and know that when I hear these types of stories, they're true, and my demon is in control. But this put the story together. I disrespected the tombstones at the gates of Hell Cemetery, so the green orb followed me home, and made sure it got my attention. I realized this 10 minutes before we were about to go there. This went from what was going on to be a cool ghost hunt attempt, to all of a sudden me taking very seriously all the things that happened for a reason, and I needed to make peace with whatever I pissed off. We got there, and it was dead silent. We parked the car and turned it off. Fog surrounded the car for a bit as I sat inside and observed my surroundings. While I was concentrated with the physical people, or physical in general, the fog surrounded the car and slowly disappeared as if the fog observed and checked us out. When I finally stepped out of the car, the fog was completely gone, and it was dead silent. My friend was terrified, so she stayed in the car. I actually had my head on straight with no fear at all, which I am proud that I managed to do this. I wanted to try to make things right with whatever green orb type entity was there trying to get my attention at my house, which I assume was a sign of anger and disappointment. So I felt I needed to put out the energy of love and asking for forgiveness. However, in the middle of me trying to explain myself, I started to hear something moving in the woods. You have to understand, it was dead silent. Then the footsteps breaking the sticks in the woods moved towards me, and since I was unarmed and unprepared for any sort of conflict, I went quickly to the car and told my friend to get out of there. She drove a little while trying to get us out of there, as she was startled. However, we got out safe and sound. She did, however, mention feeling a presence that had attached to the car. I didn't feel anything. As I researched a little more, I noticed something that is called the spook, who runs people off from the gates of hell, which I figure seems to be what had happened. I'm worried that I may not have done or finished whatever I was supposed to do to fix this situation. I can only pray that everything has worked out the way it's supposed to. My late night tip? Don't mess with the gates of hell, the Casey Cemetery in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. As promised, I am posting another series of incidents that occurred at my church's cemetery. The cemetery is located across the highway from a church and up the hill from a river bottom swamp. I will relay the first experiences that occurred at this cemetery and then add in what happened a few years later. I have some photographs that I will try to post when I figure out how to work this new scanner printer thing next to my computer. I am a historical archaeologist, not a technical wizard. The first incident that occurred was when I was 18 years old. At the time, the church cemetery was surrounded by a chain-link fence with hedges and trees grown up in it. I did a service project that removed the fence on 2 sides and cleared out all the brush and cut down 3 oak trees at the entrance gate so that their roots would not destroy any more graves. I was in charge of the project that lasted 3 separate weeks, and nothing strange happened until the pictures were developed. On a few pictures, there were white round objects and squiggly lines in the air around the project, or up towards the sky above. From what I've read, they would be classified as orbs, but I'll let you decide once I get the pictures up. In the following years, I attended many funerals and laid my best friend to rest with no incidents. I also never heard anyone report anything ever happening there either. Then came 3 summers ago. My buddy and I decided to clean up an overgrown corner where some idiot decided to plant 2 giant azalea bushes on a family section, along with a camellia. It grew over everything so bad that when we finally cleared it, we found 8 graves that the church had forgot about, and 6 more undocumented sunken depressions. While we had outbreaks from all of the poison ivy, nothing major happened. We would work until it was too dark to see and then go home. After 5 days of hacking, digging, and re-leveling the dirt, we finally had everything looking presentable. I took photos on my iPhone near dark on the last day to show the church how much better the place looked. Nothing paranormal happened or appeared on those photos. I thought I had a couple of orbs or streaks, but quickly debunked them as flying bugs when I swallowed one a few minutes later. Fast forward 1 more year. I was 25. I'm 27 now. My buddy and I decided to take over cemetery maintenance to save the church some money. We spent 3 days before Easter getting the place presentable for when most families come out to put flowers. We trimmed the bushes, roses, and other plants, cut the grass, ran weed eaters for a total of 15 hours, dug out plot borders and some sunken graves that had concrete tops with grass growing over them. We even found one headstone of a guy had been turned upside down and reburied. We righted it and found out he was a dude killed in a family feud of some kind. Turns out the feud was still hot enough to desecrate the homemade concrete headstone. My buddy freaked out that we dug up a bone in the process, but I quickly pointed out that it was an oyster shell and was common to have that thrown on top of a burial plot instead of a white gravel some families use today. Nothing happened that spring from the Easter cutting. All families were happy, and we made the cemetery presentable and uncovered things buried or lost for decades. We also started a mystery by finding 8 unknown and unmarked graves, which will forever be a mystery. The church records that the cemetery was always a church cemetery, yet some graves predate the funding of the church by over 20 years. It was in the older part, only about 15 graves, that things happened one afternoon in May of that year. I was a bit late showing up for cutting with my buddy, and he arrived earlier than I. When I showed up, he was unhooking his lawnmower and was surprised that I wasn't sweaty. I told him I just got in, and he was even more surprised. He said there was a man walking around in the cemetery when he pulled up, and he assumed it was me starting early, and that I was parked somewhere around back by the swamp or something. I had no idea who or what he saw because I arrived barely a minute after him, and no one was there. We brushed it off and got to work. We cut grass for a few hours until dark. Then I had my experience. My buddy was hooking his mower back on the trailer. It was dark enough that I finally decided to stop weed whacking because I could barely even see the grass. It was the last legal shooting light of the day. I was in the old section of the row of family I'm related to. I felt a bit uneasy, but hey, it was getting dark and it's a frickin' cemetery. I killed my weed eater and took a step to head out, and I heard another step just to the side of me. Nobody was there. I took another, and then I heard it again. I thought it was just my hearing shot by the weed eater and went walking. I made about 4 more steps when I heard it again. It was the running pitter-patter of small feet on a shorter stride trying to keep up. I could hear the grass crunching from the steps. The air felt electrified, and I heard the buzzing in my ears that sounded exactly like it did a couple of times I've been electrocuted. Then I heard laughter and feet running beside me while I was motionless. The hair on my neck stood at attention, and it's the only time that's ever happened. I made sure to get the heck out of there, threw my weed eater in the back of the truck, left out while waving goodbye to my buddy. It seems we both had experiences that day. There are more events that happened in my house that night, but I'm going to write another story since this one is a bit long. I also had an experience yesterday at work, which motivated me to go ahead and get a few of these older stories down on this website. This story is about one of Amsterdam, New York's most haunted cemeteries. If you look up Green Hill Cemetery on the web, you will find it. If you read my story, The Hidden Door, this happened a few years later when I was 16. After the experience in my last story, I became interested in the paranormal and started a ghost hunting group with my friends. I spent over $1,600 on equipment, such as 3 infrared cameras, 3 digital voice recorders, 2 EMF detectors, and an expensive digital video camera. We called ourselves API, Amsterdam Paranormal Society, and we decided to investigate the so-called haunted cemetery. Now, the first day we went, we didn't get much. It just seemed really calm and relaxing. Then we stayed for a few hours trying to capture any EVPs or EMF readings, and nothing. We decided to leave and come back the next night, and when we did, things got weird. As soon as we entered the cemetery, the air felt really thick, and we just didn't have a good feeling, but we ignored it and kept walking. We didn't get more than 30 feet into the cemetery when all of a sudden, the 2 of my friends I was with, Zach and Chris, started running really fast out of the cemetery, screaming things I can't say on here, and that scared me, so I ran with them. I kept asking what happened, and they just kept asking each other if they saw that, and I didn't know what was going on. When we went back to Zach's house, they didn't tell each other what they saw. They just sat down at the table drawing what they saw, to see if they saw the same thing. To my surprise, they both held up their drawings, and it was the same. A black hooded figure. They said when we were walking in, they saw it coming towards us, not running, but it looked like it was floating. After some sleep and clearing our minds, we decided to go back. And on this night, it was paranormal heaven. When we went back, I brought with me my video camera this time, because the other 2 nights I didn't. I started videotaping, and they started doing EVPs. I walked away from the group to see if I can get any personal experience, and while I was walking, I swore I saw a black figure running extremely fast through the cemetery, but I just figured it was my eyes messing with me, or maybe just an animal. I went back to the group and we placed a digital recorder on one of the tombstones and walked away. While walking through the whole cemetery, we started hearing footsteps behind us and felt like someone was walking right next to us. So Zach asked, if anyone's there, can you make yourself known? And all of a sudden, I was looking at the camera and no more than 3 feet away, I see the whole screen go blinding white for a split second. And I told him I think I have something. We rewinded the tape and put it in slow motion. And you can see a full apparition. Pure white, but you could tell it's a human because I paused really quick when it came into the screen and you could see the outline of its face and shoulder. Its hand is raised up as if he were running. I paused it again to where the apparition was in the middle of the screen, and you see part of the leg and back, but it turns to static as if it was electric coming off its back. And we were trying to debunk it. We did everything we could, running past, but you can see every feature on us when we run past. We could not explain how white it was. Then we listened to the audio on the camera and noticed that when we were walking on a mess of leaves because it was fall, and when this thing was running by, there were no sounds or footsteps at all. You didn't hear anything from this thing as it went by. All you heard was the sound like someone blowing into the mic, but you can hear us walking in the leaves perfectly. So we left, thinking that's all we got, and we checked our recorders, getting many EVPs. One saying, "Get the fuck out. I'll rip you apart," and "Topper." That was a great night, and I'm going to do everything I can to get the audio up here ASAP. I am hoping I can find it. I love going to that cemetery because it's peaceful during the day, but at night, sometimes all hell can break loose, and it's just a night of fun for paranormal investigators. Thanks for reading. I'll have another awesome ghost hunting story up soon. Ooh, cemeteries. Have you guys ever been like ghost hunting in a cemetery, or ever went to like a cemetery with intentions of trying to find something paranormal? Because I haven't. I mean, I don't need to look for paranormal, but I mean, I have never willingly went into a cemetery and was like, "Hey, spirits, come talk to me," because my energy would go whoop real quick. I don't know if you guys noticed, but Wednesday I did put up my very first gaming video, and you guys seem to like it. I mean, I'm pretty sure as of now there's no like thumbs down and they're all thumbs up, and I really appreciate it, guys. They will be coming out every Wednesday. I will come out with horror related video games, and of course I will keep on going until, you know, that game is done, start another game. What else? I have a new icon. Do you guys love it? A girl named Nene made it for me, and I am in love with it. It is the best thing ever. I really hope you guys like it because I really like it. So yeah. And also my new what is this, like an end slate thing? Do you like it? Is it too boring? What do you think? Is it good or not? Well, let me know, okay? And top left will be last video. Bottom left will be my next video. On the screen, you can see all my social medias, and they will all be also in the description. And remember, everyone, there's always someone or something watching you.